Have you ever experienced something that shook you to your very core? Something that makes you remember every single little detail of your surroundings from that moment in time? Even years after? I can remember so vividly the moment I realized something was wrong with me. I was in my junior year of high school sitting in class, just like any other day. I remember the smell of erasers and cheap cologne that permeated off my classmate who sat next to me. I remember the scratchy tag on my t-shirt and how I was resisting taking it off in the middle of class just to cut it off. I remember what my teacher, Mrs. Brown, was talking about, the fall of Constantinople. My mouth felt dry and I kept looking at the clock, counting down the minutes until I had lunch so I could get a soda. The sound of a pen clicking behind me was synchronized with the song that was stuck in my head. All those things were going through my brain at once. My ADHD mind went a million miles per minute when it all came down to a crashing halt when I felt it at 11:23. I felt what I can only describe as a hand grabbing at the inner lining of my stomach. It didn't necessarily hurt, not at this point. That's not why I got so scared. You see, not only do I have ADHD, I also have OCD that manifests itself in the fear of anything growing or moving inside me. Even if I think about the concept of blood moving in my body or a heart that is beating in my chest, I have to think of something else. I've had full-blown panic attacks because of it. The closest term for this is tocophobia. That's technically the fear of pregnancy. I'm a guy, so it's not completely accurate, but it's really the closest term. I mean, I also do have a huge fear of pregnancy. Not necessarily of me being pregnant, but even though I knew I could never get pregnant, the thought of it still made me feel sick. I bet you can imagine the terror that overcame me as I felt something moving in me. I made an audible groan and grabbed my stomach. My whole class turned to look at me. Even my teacher stopped talking to ask if I was okay. I stood up and started to run to the nurse's office without even acknowledging my teacher. My first thought wasn't thinking that something was actually in my body. Even stomach aches and the feeling of gurgling in my stomach made me feel this way before. I didn't have anything on hand to help with a stomach ache, unfortunately. However, the nurse always did. I sprinted across the school hoping and praying that my stomach wouldn't make that awful feeling again before I got there. I turned the corner into the nurse's office with my tennis shoes squeaking in the process. I saw the school nurse, Mrs. Kennedy, sitting on the couch in her office reading a magazine. She looked up at me with a sweet smile that quickly turned into worry. "Sam, what is it? How can I help?" she said as she stood up and hurried over to me, putting her hand over mine which was grabbing my stomach tightly. It's my stomach. Something is wrong with it," I mumbled with a red face. She shuffled her way over to her large medicine cabinet and she motioned for me to sit down. She asked me questions about my stomach, asking if it was pain, grumbling, cramps, nausea, etc. As she was asking me what my symptoms were and digging through bottles, the feeling happened again. However, this time was different. It felt like fingers grasping against the inside of my body. I screamed and wrapped my arms around my torso. Mrs. Kennedy ran over to me to comfort me. "This seems a lot worse than normal. Maybe we should call your parents," she said as she put her hand on my back. It felt like some days I saw Mrs. Kennedy more than my teachers. Any small ailment would distract me so badly from class that I had to go see her. Sometimes multiple times a day. She knew at this point when something was really wrong. Within about 30 minutes both my parents were there with us. That may seem fast, but I'm an only child and my parents are very aware of my tendencies. They know I can spiral and like to be around if it happens. They kept asking me where the pain was. I think they assumed by the way I wasn't responding to their questions the pain must have been really bad. The reality was that I just didn't know how to tell them what was going on. I got so frustrated after they asked me over and over again that I just yelled at them. "Something is inside me. Get it out, get it out, get it out." I lifted my shirt and was ripping at my stomach, leaving red nail scratches and cuts. My mom and dad ran to either side of me to grab my arms. Mrs. Kennedy had seen me go pretty crazy, but this was the worst I've ever gotten in front of her. My parents, however, had seen a similar situation before. Not exactly like this, but they didn't skip a beat on trying to help me. Sam. Breath, sweetie. Just remember everything is in you for a reason. It's keeping you alive. Nothing is going to hurt you. My mom said softly to me, trying to calm me down with the words my therapist gave her. Ice cubes, get him ice cubes, she said to Mrs. Kennedy as I started to hyperventilate. Mrs. Kennedy grabbed a Ziploc bag and started to fill it with ice cubes. My mom went over to her and grabbed an ice cube right out of the bag, opened up my hand, and put the ice cube in it. This worked in the past to distract me. I knew that's what she was doing, and trust me, I wanted it to work too, but this was different. I kept trying to tell myself that it was just a different feeling I hadn't felt before. That it wasn't possible something was physically inside my body. But I couldn't help it. Everyone in the room could see that this was getting intense. I think they assumed it was just a mental breakdown and that nothing was physically wrong with my body, but I didn't care. I just wanted help. My parents got me into the car with my mom even sitting in the back seat with me. She kept trying to distract me with conversation, but my mind was only on that awful feeling in my stomach. We pulled up to the ER and my mom guided me in while holding both my wrists. It felt like she was walking me on a leash, but I didn't fight it. I knew she was just trying to stop me from scratching my stomach. We walked in and I spoke to the receptionist. All I said was that I had terrible pain in my stomach. I didn't want to sound too crazy. I just needed a doctor to look at whatever was going on. After giving the receptionist my name and insurance information, we went to sit down. I was sitting in between my parents and I could see my mom lean back to try and mouth something to my dad without me seeing. I didn't think much of it. I was way more worried about other things. My dad then went up to the receptionist. He pointed over to me and she looked a little concerned. I saw her pick up the clipboard that had my information on it and she started writing something else on it. I asked my dad what he did and he just said to not worry and that he wanted to let her know it was urgent. No more than 10 minutes went by and I felt a terrible moving sensation. I cringed and grabbed my stomach. Immediately followed by not just the feeling of a hand grabbing my insides but also scratching and pinching. I yelled out in pain as the other people in the waiting room looked at me mortified. A doctor and a couple of nurses came running over to me and helped me up. But I couldn't stand up. I was in too much pain. They put me in a wheelchair and started to head for a room. However, they didn't take me through the normal big ER doors that went to the standard examination rooms. They took me and my parents through a smaller door to the side that had a padlock on it. We walked through a white hallway that was very quiet. The doctor and nurses showed us to my room and helped me into my bed as I was wiggling and wincing. I had one parent on either side of me. Patiently waited to stop my arms from scratching. The doctor was trying to ask further questions, but you could tell it wasn't going anywhere. I knew that my dad probably told that receptionist about my OCD tendencies and that I needed to go to the psych ward. Not just to the stranded side of the ER. I couldn't take it anymore and blurted out that something was inside my stomach and it was trying to get out. The doctor just looked at my parents for a reaction and they gave him a sad nod. It was like they warned him that this could happen. The doctor didn't just think I was crazy, my parents did too. The doctor took a deep breath and came up to me. I knew I was about to hear some kind of dumb speech about how this was just my OCD and everything was going to be okay. As he came closer to me, I pulled up my shirt and he gasped. Not only was my stomach scratched up like crazy, but we saw movement. It looked like when a pregnant woman can see her baby kicking. But this was so much stronger. It was stretching my skin. My parents stood up and gasped while the doctor looked frantic and unprepared. Shit, 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 the doctor said as he backed out of the room. Hang on. We're getting this taken care of, just hang tight. Just seconds later, a nurse came in to give me some painkillers. I started to feel the pain slip away, but something so much worse started to creep in. I heard a voice. Not my own. Not some creepy sounding creature, but the voice of a normal sounding man that I'd never heard before. But that wasn't the scary part. The scary part was what he was saying to me. Get me out. Get me out. Get me out. It started in a normal tone, but slowly became more urgent and rushed. Then demanding. The voice would coincide with the moment inside me. It was getting so loud that I was having a hard time hearing the people around me. The doctor came in just a few minutes after I last saw him. He was red and sweaty, like he'd just run a marathon. He told me they needed to do just a few tests on what was inside me before taking action. I was trying so hard to pay attention to the words coming out of his mouth, but all I could hear was the voice. The voice stopped for just a second and changed what he was saying. Now he started repeating, "Cut me out, cut me out, cut me out, now." I now knew this thing didn't just want out, but it wanted out now. I begged the doctor to just get it out now, but he wouldn't listen. The voice spoke up again. "This is taking too long. Don't be afraid. Get me out yourself." I think he could feel me resisting. Without realizing it, I was looking around the room for something. It was like I didn't even have control over my head or eyes anymore. I knew the voice was looking for a knife, but I was trying to ignore the feeling. I knew there weren't any knives around. I was in a very safe place. Just as I had the feeling I was safe, it was immediately taken away. The thought passed through my head that my dad probably had a pocket knife on him. My heart sank. I knew this thing could hear my thoughts. I knew what it would try to do. The next thing I knew, I was on my feet, leaping for my dad. My body hit his. Luckily, he's in pretty good shape for his age and had no problems putting me in my place. He got on top of me and pinned me to the ground. All while I could barely hear my mom in the background, yelling at my dad to be careful. My dad knew something was going on and that I just needed to be on the ground until I calmed down. My body tried to flail, but it wasn't successful. The whole time the voice in my head, now yelling and screaming. Not saying any distinguishable words, but just having what felt like a tantrum. What made my dad the most uncomfortable was the kicking feeling coming from my stomach. After a couple of minutes, the voice calmed down and I felt in charge of my body again. My dad slowly got up and attempted to help me up. At this point, with an audience of hospital staff that looked like they were getting ready to take me somewhere for more tests. Just as I stood up straight, I felt the voice take over and I lost all sense of my own body. I felt like a shell of myself. My dad gave me a soft yet worried smile, and in that instance, I grabbed him and reached into his pocket. My heart sank as I felt his pocket knife. The room started to panic and about 5 people tried to grab it from me. The last thing I remember is plunging the knife into my stomach. I felt a blinding pain and everything went black. Several hours later, I started to wake up. Everything was extremely blurry and fuzzy. I could hear a very faint voice telling me to relax. As the minutes passed by, things started to become a little bit clearer. I looked around and saw I was in a large room with a few other patients. A nurse was going up to all the beds and checking in on them. I tried to sit up a bit to get more comfortable and noticed an incredible sourness in my stomach. I moved my hospital gown out of the way and saw a huge scare, about 6 inches across. Most of the scare looked very surgical, like what I'd imagine a C-section surgery would look like, except where I remembered the knife going in. It looked like a bunch of extra stitches had to be added where it went in. It also looked pretty bruised. I can imagine that a dull 10-year-old knife that was harshly shoved into a body really wouldn't cleanly cut through and leave some damage. The feeling of shock from looking at my stomach was quickly gone when I realized that meant whatever was in me was now gone. I didn't hear the voice. I didn't feel a hand in my gut anymore. I didn't see that Val kicking anymore. I felt like I could breathe. I asked the nurse what they found and she looked flush. That's something that your doctor will talk with you once you eat something and can speak clearly, she said as she scurried off looking upset. Shortly after that, I was wheeled into a recovery room and my parents came to see me. As they walked in, they had a very similar look on their faces as the nurse did. They looked pale and didn't want to look me in the eye. I kept asking them questions about what was going on, but they said the doctor needed to discuss it with me and he wanted to make sure I wasn't feeling high from the anesthesia while we had a conversation. The doctor didn't come and see me for another 10 hours, which felt strange. And to add to the strangeness, my parents were taking shifts hanging out with me. There was only overlap when they switched and the other parent took over while the other one left the room. I would understand if they weren't both with me for the whole time. I'm not that needy, but they were only both in my room together for about an hour. That was the hour before the doctor came to my room. Finally, the doctor came in to talk to me. When he walked in, the room was cold and quiet. It was evident he didn't feel the same relief I was feeling. He seemed awkward, like he was talking way too long to get over to me. He grabbed a chair and scooted it close to me. "Listen, Sam. I know this last 24 hours has been very challenging. I apologize for not explaining what happened during your surgery sooner, but we all needed time to figure it out and, quite frankly, process what happened. We feel we have enough information to let you in on what is going on." A silence filled the room. It felt like no one was brave enough to break it. "And?" I said with confusion. "I think it'll be easier if we just show you." The doctor, along with my parents, helped me into a wheelchair and we started to make our way across the hospital to an entirely different section. I couldn't believe all the things running through my head at what we were about to see. It felt like cruel and unusual punishment to leave me in anticipation and not just tell me what I was about to see. When I went around the corner, I couldn't process what I was looking at. I thought they were showing me a large tumor or growth of some kind, but why would a tumor be in a big incubation chamber with tubes connected to IVs and machines coming out of it? As I got closer, I started to see human features on it. It was mostly just a 6-pound lump of flesh, but I could see a hand sticking out of it. It was small, but what made it creepy was it looked like a fully developed man's hand. Just small. I could see a patch of hair coming out of what I assumed was its head. It had no discernible facial features. Just a few teeth scattered in one section. As I looked at it with disgust, coming to terms with this thing that was just in my body, I had a realization. I wasn't feeling sick at the thought of something being in my body. Sure, I was grossed out that this particular thing was just in me, but the thought of the bacteria in my body didn't make me want to throw up. I thought about all the blood pumping through my veins and I felt normal. Not only was the voice and kicking gone, but my OCD was gone too. I didn't have a mental illness. It was just this thing, trying to find its way out for years. As I was staring at the creature, the doctor came and put his hand on my shoulder. "We believe this is your twin brother." I immediately looked up at my parents, who looked very disturbed and upset. I let the doctor finish talking. "We believe that you absorbed him in the womb and that he has been living inside you your whole life. This is an extremely rare condition called fetus in fetu. It seems he didn't quite have the best opportunity to develop normally. That's why he looks the way he does. Despite his appearance, he has all the organs he needs to survive. Looks like he's missing a lung and his gallbladder. Also a piece of his liver, but other than that, it looks like he will live for at least a few years. He won't be able to leave this room due to him needing a feeding tube and a few other things that his body cannot do on its own. He needs lots of support just to live. What makes this situation extremely unique is that your twin is still alive despite your body not sustaining him anymore. Even though we have him hooked up to a few IVs and machines, it is unexplainable how he is living while outside of your body." I was in complete shock. I didn't want to believe it. I asked my mom why she never told me I absorbed my twin in the womb. She said she had no clue. There was never a sign when she was pregnant with me. He also mentioned that sometimes even in pregnancies women will go their whole pregnancy without even getting a belly. It's called a cryptic pregnancy. I've always had a bit of a gut, but never anything big enough to cause suspicion. I guess in my case I had a fetus fetu and an experience similar to a cryptic pregnancy, even though it was in my stomach. At least that was the doctor's best guess. Although, it all sounded like BS to me. The doctor and my parents kept trying to explain more and more details to me. I don't know why they didn't slow down a little bit for my sake. How could they not tell I wasn't processing any of this? I noticed something while they were trying to explain things to me. They kept calling it a he. Now listen. I'm not some kind of asshole that won't respect someone who wants to be called a specific pronoun. I've never been that kind of person. But this is where I draw the line. Not just that. But this thing had a name. My parents named it and said today was its birthday. While they told me all this information, they didn't look happy about it. It seemed like they were forced to do all this nonsense. And now it was my turn to be convinced. I could tell they were trying to force it. The doctor told me despite it not having a high probability for a long life that we should still try and give it the love it deserves. Of course, the doctor referred to it as a he, but I refused to. This disgusted me. This thing tried to kill me and ruin my quality of life for so long, and now we're going to treat it like it's some kind of prince? No, absolutely not. Luckily, it seemed like it would never leave the hospital, but my parents planned on going to visit it daily. Visiting it? Are you kidding me? It has no eyes, no ears, it's probably miserable and has no concept of people even being around it. I'm refusing to ever see this thing again or acknowledge its existence again. I could get in trouble for even talking about this. The hospital or anyone involved has signed NDAs to not share any information about this until it officially dies. This is because it's a medical anomaly and the first of its kind. They want to do the proper research on how this all occurred before coming out with a statement. I just have to get this all off my chest. I feel like I'm the crazy one here when I know I'm not. I don't care if I get in trouble. I am scared that the doctors are trying to force my parents into giving this thing a proper life. I think that's why it took them so long to tell me. I think they scared my parents into keeping it alive and guilting them or even forcing them into being its parent. I'm all for every life being important and all that stuff, but I have a feeling my parents are terrified of this thing just like I am. I am convinced they gaslit my parents into believing this thing is my brother. If there wasn't any sign of him while my mom was pregnant with me, could this thing be something else? This all happened about 2 years ago. It's still alive and they are still researching it. My parents continue to visit it despite everything. My therapist told me that I'm probably just struggling with jealousy now that I'm not an only child anymore and so much of my parents' attention is on him now, but it's so much bigger than just jealousy. Since this thing showed up and my OCD is pretty much gone, I've hardly seen my parents. I know I'm not just jealous. There is something more to this. I know it. Something just feels so off about this whole thing. What is this thing? Where did it come from? And what does it want? As far back as I can remember, I had always been passionate about the great outdoors. My love for the wilderness began when I joined the Scouts, exploring the diverse landscapes of Southern California, Nevada, Arizona, and Utah. I was never a huge fan of the dry, barren landscapes, but camping provided a much-needed escape from the monotony of Orange County suburbia. The first time I visited the Pacific Northwest, I was enchanted. The scenery was breathtaking, majestic mountains, lush fields, and meandering rivers. It was clear that anyone who praised the desert's beauty had never laid eyes on the Cascades. Seeing grass and wildflowers growing without irrigation was practically a revelation. When I was old enough, I moved to Washington State, immersing myself in nature every weekend. My adventures took me hiking through dense forests, camping by serene lakes, and occasionally taking mushrooms under peaceful waterfalls. I joined several online forums dedicated to outdoor enthusiasts. One community that particularly fascinated me was the Northwest Tomb Raiders. This group of history buffs and thrill seekers was dedicated to uncovering artifacts, whether Native American relics or treasures hidden in modern ruins. Many members were collectors, fencing their finds to museums and archaeologists, which made it a rather profitable side gig, should you be lucky enough. In the fall of 2009, an intriguing post appeared on the forum. A user named Locke claimed to have discovered a cache of artifacts with Scandinavian origins. He couldn't carry everything back due to the treacherous terrain and his age, so he shared the coordinates, hoping someone else could retrieve the items. I scrolled down to see a few posts of people planning to loot it in the spring, when the paths have reopened. One user, Patagoner, planned on going as early as possible. Excited by the prospect, I gathered my two friends, Carl and Noah, for the expedition. They weren't as enthusiastic about camping as I was, but after I told them how much a single arrowhead goes for on the black market, they were on board. It was the start of winter now, which had its advantages and disadvantages. On the plus side, the rangers would have a harder time spotting us. On the downside, the harsh conditions posed a serious challenge for two inexperienced hikers. I must have blown about $4,000 at REI on gear for them, justifying it with the knowledge of how much more I would make with 2 extra packs. That is of course assuming there really were as many artifacts as Locke had said, and Patagoner hadn't beaten me there. The journey began like any other. We met in the pre-dawn darkness and went over our supplies, ensuring we had everything we needed. By mid-morning, we were on our way, my pickup truck winding up the mountain paths. The roads of Olympic National Park were the epitome of the raw, untamed beauty of the Pacific Northwest. They snaked through ancient forests, where towering Douglas firs and western hemlocks create a verdant canopy overhead. Mist clings to the trees, giving the landscape an ethereal quality. Occasionally, the forest would open up to reveal breathtaking vistas of snow-capped peaks and deep, shadowy valleys. As we climbed higher, the landscape grew increasingly desolate. The dense forest thinned out, replaced by rugged terrain and jagged rock formations. The air grew colder, and the first flurries of snow began to fall, dusting the ground in a thin, white layer. The road became narrower and more treacherous, winding precariously along the edge of steep cliffs. Finally, a road closure blockade signaled the end of our journey in the truck. We unloaded 3 dirt bikes, 1 mine, 2 rentals, and continued up the trail. The bikes roared to life, carrying us several more miles into the wilderness. The trail twisted and turned, cutting through dense underbrush and over fallen logs. The snow began to fall more heavily, blanketing the forest floor and muffling the sound of our engines. The world around us grew quieter, more isolated. Eventually, the snow became too deep to traverse by bike. We dismounted and prepared to continue on foot. The silence of the forest was profound, broken only by the occasional rustle of branches in the wind. I checked my modern GPS, its screen displaying the coordinates and a relief map of our destination. The cold air bit into our cheeks as we trudged through the snow-laden forest. The silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the crunch of our footsteps and the occasional call of distant wildlife. The GPS indicated we were close to our destination, but the dense underbrush and uneven terrain made progress slow. Suddenly, Carl's excited whisper cut through the stillness. "Hey, look at that!" He pointed to a small, furry creature ambling through the trees. It took a moment to realize what it was, a bear cub innocently exploring its surroundings. My heart sank. "Carl, get back," I hissed, my voice low but urgent. "Where there's a cub, there's a..." Before I could finish, a massive shape exploded from the trees. The mother bear, easily 3 times the size of the cub, charged at Carl with a ferocity. She was a blur of dark fur and powerful muscles, her roar echoing through the forest. "Run!" I yelled, but it was too late. The bear was upon Carl, swiping at him with her massive paws. He screamed as he fell to the ground, the bear towering over him. Desperation and adrenaline surged through me. I grabbed the nearest heavy branch and swung it at the bear, hoping to distract her. Noah joined in, shouting and waving his arms. We had to be careful. One wrong move and she would turn on us. The bear snarled, turning our attention away from Carl for just a moment. It was enough for him to scramble backwards, clutching his bleeding arm. We have to get him out of here, I shouted to Noah, who nodded, fear etched on his face. The bear, still enraged, seemed torn between attacking us and protecting our cub. Using the brief respite, we hauled Carl to his feet. His face was white, and he was clearly in shock. Blood soaked his sleeve, dripping onto the snow. There's a ranger station about 2 miles from here, I said, my voice shaking. We need to get him there. Now. We half-carried, half-dragged Carl through the forest, every shadow and sound heightening our paranoia. Finally, after what felt like forever, the small, wooden structure of the ranger station came into view. We had been avoiding the rangers to keep our expedition secret, but now it was our only hope. Pounding on the door, I prayed for a quick response. The door creaked open, and a weathered face appeared. What happened? The ranger demanded, taking in the sight of Carl's bloody form. Bear attack, I gasped. We need help. The ranger's expression shifted from suspicion to urgency. Get him inside. We've got a first aid kit and a radio. As we eased Carl onto a makeshift bed, the ranger inspected his wounds. You're lucky, he said after a moment. The cuts are deep, but they missed any major arteries. He'll need stitches, but we can handle that here. No need for airlift. The ranger's face darkened as he turned to me. What the hell are you boys doing out here? I hesitated. We were just exploring. The ranger's eyes narrowed, his anger palpable. Exploring? In a restricted area? In the middle of winter? Are you out of your minds? He worked quickly and efficiently, cleaning and stitching Carl's wounds. Carl winced but stayed silent, his eyes closed in pain. Do you have any idea how dangerous it is out here? The ranger continued, his voice rising. The storm, the wildlife. This area is off limits for a reason. You should have known better, he said, pushing a finger into my chest. We'll stay here for the night, he continued, the storm's getting worse, and it's too dangerous to move him now. We'll reassess in the morning. And count yourself lucky I don't arrest your asses. Night fell quickly, the storm outside growing more ferocious with each passing minute. The howling wind battered the small ranger station, and the walls creaked under the pressure. We huddled in the main room, the tension thick in the air. The ranger looked at us sternly. I need to check the perimeter and make sure everything is secure. There are things out there you don't want to encounter, especially in this storm. Things? What do you mean? Noah asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The ranger's expression hardened. Just stay put. No matter what you see or hear, do not leave this cabin. Understood? We nodded, the seriousness in his tone leaving no room for argument. We'll stay put, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The ranger grabbed his coat and shotgun. I'll be back in an hour. Do not leave this cabin. With that, he opened the door and stepped into the raging storm, disappearing into the darkness. As soon as the door closed, I turned to Noah. We need to go. Now. Noah's eyes widened. Are you crazy? He said to stay put. If we wait until morning, we'll be escorted out of here and lose our chance. This might be our only opportunity to find those artifacts. Noah hesitated with uncertainty, but what about Carl? He'll be fine here. The ranger can take care of him. We have to do this now. Reluctantly, Noah nodded. All right. Let's take what we can and go. We quickly looted extra gear from the cabin. I checked the GPS one last time before we slipped out into the storm, the cold wind battering us. The snow fell heavily, obscuring our vision as we slogged through the forest. The ranger was nowhere in sight as we made our way towards our destination, each step filled with trepidatious excitement. The storm began to die down as we approached the coordinates. We stepped into a clearing where the undisturbed snow lay like a pristine white blanket. In the center stood an ancient, withered stone altar, encircled by intricate wooden carvings, delicate metalwork, and beautifully crafted statues. The sight was breathtaking, a treasure trove, a veritable museum of paganism. Noah and I exchanged glances, our eyes wide with amazement. "Do you see this?" I whispered, barely able to contain my excitement. "We're going to be rich," Noah replied, his voice trembling with awe. "These must be worth a fortune." We approached cautiously, as if the vision before us might disappear. The craftsmanship was stunning. I reached out to touch a carved wooden idol, marveling at the detail. "This is incredible," I said, my voice barely audible. We began to load our packs with as many artifacts as we could carry, each one more exquisite than the last. It was beyond our wildest dreams. We were so engrossed in our task that we didn't notice the small figure watching us from the ridge. It wasn't until I turned to leave that I saw her. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, stood there, her blue eyes wide with curiosity. She was dressed in simple, rustic clothing, her blonde straight hair blowing gently in the wind. For a moment, we just stared at each other. "Noah," I whispered urgently, nudging him. "Look." He turned, his eyes following my gaze. "What the?" he muttered, his voice trailing off. The girl took a tentative step forward, her eyes fixed on the items in her hands. There was no fear in her gaze, only a quiet intensity that made my skin crawl. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She tilted her head slightly. "My name is Saijan." "What are you doing out here, Saijan?" Noah asked, his voice shaky. "I live here." "You live here?" I echoed, incredulous. "Is there anyone else around?" "Yes," she whispered. "Where?" Noah demanded, looking around nervously. "Everywhere," she said with a giggle. The way she said it, so matter-of-factly, bothered me deeply. Noah and I exchanged a look, both of us trying to figure out what to do next. "We can't take her back to the ranger," Noah started. "We'll lose everything." I nodded, my mind racing. "Saijan," I said slowly, "we need to know who else is here. Can you help us?" She looked at me with her piercing blue eyes, then said, "I'm sorry." "For what?" Noah asked. "For what's going to happen to you," she replied, her voice tinged with sadness. "You need to tell us what's going on," Noah said, grabbing her arm roughly. "Why are you out here alone?" She looked up at him, unperturbed. "I am not alone," she said softly. Before we could press her further, a loud, guttural sound echoed through the clearing. We turned towards the direction the girl had come from, and there, emerging from the shadows, was the silhouette of an elk. As it approached, my stomach dropped. Its body was a grotesque amalgamation of life and decay. Its skull was fully exposed, the eye sockets dark and empty. Large patches of its ribs were visible, the flesh around them rotted away. The elk's movements were slow and deliberate, its head swaying as if in a trance. It walked directly towards us, its hollow eyes fixed on Saijan. The closer it got, the more the stench of death filled the air, a nauseating mix of decay and earth. I fought the urge to retch. Saijan stood up, her expression calm. The monster sniffed her gently, its nostrils flaring. Without a word, she climbed onto its back, mounting it like a horse. It was a surreal and horrifying scene ripped straight from a nightmare. As she settled onto the elk, she looked back at us. "A thief in the night shall reap what he sows," she said, her voice carrying an otherworldly echo. "Beware the price of stolen dreams." With that, the beast turned and began to walk away, Saijan riding it into the shadows of the forest. We stood there, frozen in place. The realization that we were in far over our heads began to sink in. This started to feel like a trap. We need to get out of here, my voice trembling. Now. We turned to leave, our packs heavy with the pilfered goods. But as we took our first steps, the forest around us seemed to come alive. Shadows moved among the trees, and whispers floated on the wind. I quickened my pace, glancing nervously over my shoulder. Did you hear that? Noah asked sharply. Just keep moving, I commanded. A figure emerged from the shadows, blocking our path. It was a man, tall and gaunt, his eyes burning with an intense light. Where do you think you're going? He asked, his voice cold and menacing. We're leaving, I stammered. We didn't mean any harm. The man smirked, and with a swift motion, he raised his hand. More figures appeared, closing out us from all sides. We were surrounded. Run! I shouted, shoving Noah forward. We sprinted through the forest, branches whipping at our faces and legs. The figures pursued us, their footsteps silent and relentless. Noah stumbled and fell, his pack spilling open. Statues scattered across the ground, glinting in the moonlight. Help! He cried, scrambling to gather the items. Leave them! I shouted, pulling him to his feet. We have to keep moving. But it was too late, their hands seizing us. I struggled, kicking and thrashing, but their grips were too strong. They forced us to the ground, binding our hands with rough, coarse ropes. Please, I begged, don't hurt us. The man who had first appeared stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with amusement. A thief in the night, he mocked. They dragged us through the forest, the trees closing in around us like a cage. We were at their mercy. In the distance, I could see the elk standing at the edge of the clearing, Sijan still astride its back. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of pity. But then they turned away, disappearing into the shadows once more. We were dragged into the heart of the forest, our struggles futile against the unyielding grip of our captors. As we broke through the tree-line, a massive bonfire came into view, its flames licking the night sky. Shadows danced around the clearing, cast by the flickering light. A woman stood at the forefront, her presence commanding. Her eyes were milk white, devoid of pupils, and her long, flowing white hair cascaded down her back. She was completely naked, her skin pale and marked with intricate symbols. Atop her head, she wore an elk skull, its antlers extending like eerie, skeletal fingers. She beat a drum emblazoned with more of the same cryptic symbols, each thud resonating deep within my chest. Around the fire, about 24 people stood, all drinking from crude, horn cups. Their faces were solemn, eyes fixed on the woman as she led them in a haunting chant. The atmosphere was thick with a mix of reverence and intoxication. We were forced to our knees before the woman, who paused her drumming to look down at us. Her gaze was haunting, as if she could see into the very depths of our souls. Who are you? Noah demanded, his voice trembling. The woman ignored him, raising her arms to the sky. The chanting grew louder, the rhythm of the drum faster and more frenzied. The air around us seemed to vibrate with energy, the flames of the bonfire growing higher and more intense. I glanced at Noah, fear mirrored in his eyes. The woman began to speak, her voice low and melodic, but filled with power, in a language I couldn't understand. Suddenly, she stopped, lowering her arms. The chanting ceased, and in silence fell over the clearing. She looked directly at me, her white eyes unblinking. Entje net ten skorter vad han sar, acted dig for drummer som dus jal och far. Han skrap bevaker London's gamde stig, dar skugger sweeper over Skogens live. For varj stulet andetag oxvek, mast Entje moda sit smart sama odlek. Tricksterns vilja, var Andy har, sai hans nad, var live bar. I was terrified and confused. She started again, softer, in a way I could understand. A thief in the night shall reap what he sows, but with the price of stolen dreams. His laughter guards our hidden groves, where shadows cloak the forest seams. For every stolen breath and lie, a thief must meet his painful end. The trickster's will our spirits tie, so in his grace our lives suspend. The crowd surged forward, grabbing Noah first. He screamed, his terror echoing through the trees as they pulled him towards a makeshift altar beside the bonfire. The woman chanted louder, her voice rising in a hypnotic rhythm as they began their gruesome work. They stripped him of his shirt and bound his arms to a wooden frame. I tried to move, to help him, but the grip on my shoulders tightened, pinning me to the ground. The woman approached Noah, holding a knife with a blade that gleamed in the firelight. She started to slice into his back, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Noah's screams pierced the night as she methodically carved the shape of wings into his flesh. Blood poured from the wounds, soaking the ground beneath him. The crowd's chant grew louder, almost drowning out his cries. I watched in horror as the woman reached into the incisions, breaking the ribs and pulling them outward, creating a parody of wings. Noah's agony was unbearable to witness. His screams turned to whimpers, his body convulsing in pain. The woman didn't stop until the work was complete, his lungs exposed and hanging grotesquely from his back. They lifted Noah's broken body and placed him over the fire. The smell of burning flesh filled the air, making me gag. His life ebbed away as the flames consumed him, the once vibrant light in his eyes fading to nothing. The woman turned to me, her expression devoid of mercy. "You will meet the same fate," she said, "he demands it." The smell of burning flesh and the sight of his broken body over the fire was seared into my mind. Despair settled over me as I closed my eyes. A deafening blast shattered the night. My eyes flew open to see the shaman stumbling backward, a gaping mound in her chest. She collapsed to the ground, her white eyes staring lifelessly into the void. The villagers turned in shock as another shot rang out, this time hitting one of the men holding me. I twisted free from their grasp and saw the park ranger standing at the edge of the clearing, a pump-action shotgun in his hands. He fired again, the sound echoing through the forest, before one of them tackled him to the ground. "Run," he shouted, his voice raw and desperate. "Get the hell out of here." I didn't need to be told twice. I sprinted into the darkness, the chaos of the clearing fading behind me. Branches whipped at my face, and the snow underfoot made every step a struggle. I could hear the sounds of fighting and gunshots, but I forced myself to keep moving. The cold air burned in my lungs, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I didn't stop until I reached the station, my legs threatening to give out from under me. I burst through the door and slammed it behind me. Inside, Carl lay where we had left him, his face pale and twisted in pain. I stumbled to the radio, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the controls. "Mayday, mayday!" I yelled into the microphone. "This is an emergency. We need help. Please, someone, come quickly." Static filled the room, punctuated by my ragged breaths. I repeated the call, my voice growing more frantic with each passing second. Finally, a voice crackled through the speaker. "This is Ranger Station Bravo. What's your location?" "Over." I could barely form the words. "Olympic National Park. The ranger station near Mount Christie. We're under attack. Please, send help." "Copy that. Help is on the way. Stay put and stay safe." "Over." I collapsed to the floor, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. Carl moaned softly, his eyes fluttering open. What happened? Where's Noah?" Tears streamed down my face and I found myself choked up. "He's gone, man. Help is coming." The minutes stretched into an eternity as we waited. The wind howled around the station, and every creak and groan of the structure set my nerves on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the forest itself was closing in on us. The radio crackled again, this time with a different voice. "Helicopter en route, ETA 15 minutes. Prepare for extraction." I glanced at Carl, his eyes filled with confusion. Hang on. We're getting out of here. As the minutes ticked by, I couldn't help but think about the ranger. He had saved my life, but he hadn't made it back. My mind conjured up images of what might have happened to him, the cultists overwhelming him in the darkness. A sense of guilt gnawed at me, knowing he had sacrificed himself for us. The sound of rotors cut through the night, growing louder as the helicopter approached. I ran to the window and saw its searchlight piercing the treetops, scanning for the station. I helped Carl to his feet, supporting his weight as we made our way to the hatch. The helicopter hovered above, lowering a rescue basket. The wind from the rotors whipped the snow into a frenzy, but I didn't care. Salvation was finally here. We secured Carl in the basket first, and I watched as he was hoisted up, disappearing into the safety of the helicopter. My turn was next. I realized that I was now alone and exposed. Fear coursing through me as I scanned around the edge of the forest, expecting to be grabbed and taken seconds before my rescue. But the moment never came. As I gripped the rope, I took one last look at the forest below. The flames of the bonfire still flickered in the distance. I was lifted into the air, the ground falling away beneath me. The helicopter's crew pulled me inside, and I collapsed onto the floor, still holding onto my pack, my body finally giving into exhaustion. The doors closed, and the helicopter banked away, leaving the horrors of the park behind. Weeks had passed since the harrowing events, but the memories clung to me like the bitter cold. I had returned to civilization, seeking solace in the familiar chaos of the city. I found a wealthy collector through a network of contacts. The artifacts fetched a price tenfold the cost of gear. The money was substantial, but as I held the cash, it felt like a hollow victory. Noah's absence weighed heavily on me. His disappearance was chalked up as a missing persons case, and despite my best efforts to explain what had happened, no one believed me. The authorities conducted a search of the area, but they found no trace of the cult, the artifacts, or the clearing. It was as if the forest had swallowed up all the evidence. I returned to the site where we had parked the truck. The dirt bikes were gone, stolen by opportunistic thieves, but the truck remained. I drove back in silence, the road winding through the dense forest. For a moment, I thought I saw the girl watching me from atop a ridge until I realized it was just paranoia. I stepped on the gas a little harder. Back home, I checked the Tomb Raider's forum again. The post that had led us into the forest was gone, deleted without a trace. I messaged the mods, but apparently they don't keep records to maintain confidentiality. I wrote about our experience, detailing every terrifying moment, but the responses were skeptical at best. Most dismissed it as a work of fiction or a desperate cry for attention. Time passed, and I tried to return to a semblance of normalcy. Yet, the wilderness called to me stronger than ever. It was my sanctuary, the only place where I could find peace amidst the turmoil. I spent more and more time outdoors than ever before, but now it always felt like I was just running from something. Determined to prove what had happened, I returned to the forest with a camera and recording equipment. This time, I documented every step, capturing footage of the trees, the snow, and the eerie silence that hung in the air. I retraced our path, hoping to find the clearing again. But each night, as I reviewed the footage, something strange would happen. The files would be corrupted or entire segments missing. I pressed on. I found the site where Noah had fallen, the ground still bearing faint traces of what had happened. I set up the camera and began to speak, recounting the events in detail. As I spoke, a cold wind swept through the clearing, and the camera's screen flickered. I finished my account and turned to check the recording, only to find the file corrupted once again, the footage replaced by static and a faint, mocking laughter. I returned home, defeated and exhausted. My attempts to share what I had experienced were met with disbelief and ridicule. The files I managed to save were corrupted beyond recognition. It was as if the forest itself was conspiring against me. Almost exactly 1 year later, as I browsed the forums, a new post caught my eye. It was cryptic, eerily similar to the one that had led us into the nightmare. It spoke of another trove of artifacts, hidden deep within the wilderness, waiting to be claimed. The post was signed with a new name, Skig. Different handle, same style. Another trap. They had taken so much from me, left scars that would never heal. I opened my drawer, my fingers brushing over the cold metal of my weapons. This was the moment I had been waiting for. This time, I'll be ready. The forest's secrets won't remain hidden forever.